everyone, and welcome back to Fiber, Floss, and Fiction. This is Anne, and today is November 4th, 2022. I hope everybody is doing well. As you can probably tell from my extra warm, snuggly things, it has definitely turned colder here. We actually had some snow overnight, although it's not sticking to the pavement surfaces. It's just on the grass and the trees and looks beautiful. I don't think it's going to stick around very much. We're supposed to be back in the 50s here in the mountains of northern New Mexico for the next week. And so we're kind of in that fall back and forth time, which is very fun because you get to have slightly warmer, sunnier days and then cold and blustery days, which I love. So very happy to report that we have moved into actual fall, November-ish type weather. If you are new to the podcast, welcome. I hope that you find a reason to hit the subscribe button or come back and visit at some other time. And if you are a returning viewer, as always, welcome. Welcome back. And you know that I enjoy spending time with you and getting you caught up on all of the crafty things that I do. So typical podcast today is going to cover knitting. I don't have any hand spun to share really. I'm still working on the current skein, so not much to share or show there. We'll talk about some books and then we will get into cross stitch. So kind of my normal segments, as always, timestamps and little postcardy breaks between each of the segments. So you're welcome to skip through to find the information that interests you the most. But yeah, other than that, not really any life updates to report. Just normal stuff going on here in our lives. So nothing too crazy. We're kind of getting ready for the Thanksgiving holiday here in the States when we'll be visiting some family and doing a little bit of traveling. So I think my next podcast might be a little bit longer interval than the 2 weeks I've been shooting for, just with the holiday in between, but definitely sometime before the end of November, I will be back. So let's go ahead and we'll get started on today's topics and let me show you what I've been working on and reading. So I have several finished objects to share this week. A couple of hats and my shawl. Let's start with the hats first because they're pretty quick and easy. Apparently I am knitting a lot of gray right now. Gray is one of my favorite colors, so it's not unusual, but even more than usual this go round. The first one is the Dustland hat. This is a pattern by Stephen West, and it's kind of a traditional Gansey pattern. You can see there's like knit purl texture pattern on it. Very fun to knit and pretty easy to knit as well. I opted for the largest size, so it's a big kind of slouchy hat. Very generously sized, let's say that. I knit it using a skein of Black Isle Yarns. Ball Blair is the name of the yarn. Here's the yarn tag. It is, well, it's DK weight and it is 65% Gotland wool, which is traditionally kind of Scandinavian wool, and then Blueface Leicester. 35% in this beautiful natural gray. I didn't quite use up all of the yarn, but that's okay. It's more of a sort of heavy sport weight rather than a true DK. So I dropped down a needle size from what the pattern called for. And as you can see, it still turned out plenty big. I had not worked with this yarn before. This was in a like yarn tasting box that I got from the Woolly Thistle, which is here in America, but they import a lot of European yarns, a lot of yarns from the British Isles. And this is from a yarn purveyor who is in Scotland. So it was very, very nice to use. I would love to have a sweater quantity of this at some point. She does kind of small heritage breed small batches of yarn. So none on her website currently, but in the future, someday I would love to use this for a sweater. It's kind of a nice combination of, I mean, it's not soft like merino, but it is soft. I mean, it's plenty soft. It has a little bit of natural lanolin in it, and I think it would hold up great in a sweater and would not pill very much, just because the two breeds that are in the yarn blend are longer staple breeds. The Gotland is, I think, even in most cases longer than the BFL. So someday I will get a sweater's quantity worth to use because I really enjoyed using this yarn. Woolly Thistle does not currently have this on their website, so it's just kind of in between production, I think. This is going in the charity box for my mom's church. And the second gray hat that I knit is a very modified version of a pattern called Bolton Pass. And this is a free pattern by Espace Tricot. It is also DK weight, but I used some of the leftover fingering weight, you'll see from my gray shawl here in a minute, to hold double. This was Willy Wonka Fibers Celestial base, and it is a 70-20-10 blend of alpaca, wool, and silk. So the original pattern, I mean, this is a really basic pattern, but it has this nice twisted stitch kind of mountain peak on the side. The original one calls for a deeper, deeper patterning of this. It comes further up, but then the top is oddly shaped. It makes for like a very almost pointy hat top, which I don't particularly care for. So what I did is I just kind of used this patterning to make this be a little bit more interesting than a plain stockinette hat. And then I adjusted the crown decreases so that they were worked as like a spiral decrease and made for a more rounded hat top. This is also knit in the large size and came out so soft and lovely. I am so sad that I am out of this yarn. I'll talk about it in a minute. But anyway, I used up almost all of it. I just have a little tiny bit left that I probably will toss. There's not really enough to do with it. Maybe I can get a blanket square out of it, but maybe not. Anyway, I have all of the information about how I altered this pattern in my Ravelry notes for this project. So if you're interested, you can check them out there, but a nice basic free pattern that I just kind of riffed off of and came up with this. So those are the two hats that are finished. Then I finished up the Aloft shawl that I had been working on. And this is also knit in Willy Wonka Fibers Celestial. So it's that same gray alpaca wool silk blend. The colorway was Milky Way. This was a club yarn that I had custom spun at a local mill when I was still running my business. And I had 3 colorways, and it was used for some of the projects that I did for my club, like the designs I did, and then some of the other designers used the base as well. So there's not very much of this out in the world, and I'm sad of that because I really, really like this blend and how it works up. It has just a little bit of halo, but it's not like overly fuzzy. I don't know if you can see that, but it is this beautiful, true heathery gray. And it works great for shawls, but sweaters also totally appropriate in this. So the pattern, which is, again, a loft, was originally in the 52 Weeks of Shawls book collection from Lane Knits, or Lane, I think is how they pronounce it. It looks like Lane, but it's pronounced differently. The designer is Becca Knits, and she now has this as a standalone pattern where you can just get the PDF download separately, just as its own individual pattern off of Ravelry. I knit the middle size, which means that there are 4 of these kind of winged repeats, and then these rows with the little bobbles in them. I used a lot less yarn than the pattern called for, and my gauge is pretty close. It's not exact, but it's definitely what I would consider perfectly in the ballpark for a shawl. This size called for about 1,100 yards. I had 1,200, just under 1,200 of this yarn base left. So I thought that would work out just fine. I only used about 750 yards total. And you can see this is a plenty big shawl. It's knit from this top point down. I wouldn't consider it a particularly difficult shawl. The instructions to get the charts set up were kind of confusing, and it took me a little bit to figure that out, how the chart worked in reality. I think if you would like to knit this shawl, that if you have knit a top-down triangular, symmetrical triangular shawl shape, you'll get it figured out, but it is not intuitive to get it started. If you're a brand new lace shawl knitter, I think I would suggest another pattern to start with, so you understand the construction before you try to add in the odd way that it's written. Came out beautifully though. Let me show you a quick detail. So this lace pattern is very straightforward and easy. And then these are just stacked yarn overs, and there's a little bobble in the center of each one. I don't know if you can see that texture well enough or not. I did not love the instructions that they gave for making bobbles. It came out kind of flat, and if I'm going to spend the time making a bobble, I want the bobble to show. So I switched it up and used the bobble technique I normally like to use, and they sit up on the surface a lot better. So I made that adjustment, but I worked the bobbles otherwise as written on the charts. And then it's finished off with this stacked, like V, interlocked V pattern. So the inspiration for the pattern was flocks of migratory birds, which I think definitely kind of looks like that in the sky, which was a nice tie-in for fall. I think I mentioned in my last podcast, or maybe 2 ago when I started this, I am doing a personal challenge where I'm going to be knitting 26 shawls in alphabetical order. So this is A for aloft. Really happy with how this came out. It is lovely and soft, and I just think the color is beautiful. I love this color gray. So that is, oh, and I should mention, it has a nice detailed edging that has a rolled I-cord along all 3 edges. So you just work that as you go. And then when you're ready to be finished, it is what finishes and binds off the bottom border, this I-cord. So yeah, really pleased with how that came out. And that's the first of my 26 pattern project that I'll be working on. Not any specific time frame for that, but just working my way through a list of shawls, because I have a ton of shawl patterns in my library that I've never knit. Okay, so that's going to do us for finished objects. Let's talk about works in progress. I have several projects on the go right now. I cast on several new things since the last time we talked, but let's talk about the one thing that was in progress last time that I've made some progress on. This is the first plain vanilla type stripy sock from Desert Vista Dye Works using their Viso sock. I did a 2x2 rib here, knit 2, purl 2 rib here, and a Fish Lips Kiss heel in contrast brown and contrast toe as well. Let me grab their yarn label real quick. These are all self-striping sock yarns. So here is Susan's business information. And this is the colorway Big Damn Heroes, which is a Firefly reference, if you're familiar with that series, one of my favorites. So it's all brown coats colors. And I love it. I think they're fun. I never don't like knitting these. They're just very potato chip knit. Used a 72 stitch circumference for the heel or for the foot and the leg, and just enjoying watching the stripes go around. So these will be on pause for a little bit because I'm working on a monthly challenge prompt, which I'll show you here in a minute, with another patterned pair. But these will get cast back on for sock number 2 at some point in the relatively near future. And then, let's see, the next pair that I'm working on is a brand new cast on. These are the Vintage Fairy Lights socks. The pattern is by Helen Stewart. And they feature this pretty twisted stitch and like, well, little vintage light looking pattern to them. And then the rest of the leg and foot is just this 3x1 rib. So it kind of resolves into a slightly more simple pattern for the rest of it. This is the first sock, so I have that one cast on, and I am using Spun Right Round's Classic Sock, which is 100% superwash merino. And I love how this knits up. It becomes beautifully soft and wears great. It's got a nice tight twist to it. And this colorway is called Hocus Pocus, which is speckled lavender and pink and lime green, which I love. It's just very fun to work with. So I'm working on those for a Socks from Stash group prompt, where you should, for the month of November, knit a pattern that you've knit before. And I knit these quite a while ago. Loved them so much that I wore them out, so time for a replacement pair in that colorway, which I think will be very fun. And I like that it's sort of fairy colored, light and bright. Next up, I also have started a new hat. This is the Muscle Bro hat by Isolde Teague. It's kind of been everywhere this fall. The pattern itself is really more of a recipe kind of pattern. You can pick any weight of yarn and she gives you, here's what you need to increase to for your circumference based on your gauge. You don't even need to do a gauge swatch because she has you check the gauge in like one of these little pie sections after you start at this very top point. And so you can just cast on with whatever yarn you like, needle size you feel works well, and just start working and then figure out what size you're going to work to, because as you increase on these sections here in between, you'll eventually get to the correct circumference for your gauge and size that you want. It's a little bit fiddly to start. It has this invisible pinhole type cast on. I normally use the tutorial that's on the Tin Can Knits website to start mine, but there's no getting around it. It's fiddly. You have very few stitches and you kind of have extra needles, and you just have to be careful when you get it started. But once you start increasing, then it goes pretty quickly. This is designed to use up basically a whole skein of yarn because it will be a double thickness hat when I'm finished. So I'm just going to knit this big long tube till I'm going to keep weighing my yarn. When I get to about 85 to 90 grams used up of the 100-gram skein, I'm going to work the matching decreases that will look like this, and then the hat gets folded inside itself. Let me see if there's a picture that I can share. So just a basic hat with a little bit of slouch, or you can make it fit more like a beanie and fold up the extra at the brim once you fold it in half. So it's very mindless knitting. It's great, like waiting room. I'm waiting for the water to boil kind of knit, because you can just knit around and around and around. And the yarn that I'm using actually came in a Halloween themed box from McMullen Fiber Company. It had 3 skeins of her Posh sock, which is 80% superwash merino, 10% cashmere, and 10% nylon. The box was themed on the Bronte sisters. So Charlotte, Anne, I've just misplaced the last of the Bronte, Emily. There we go. And this is the one based on Anne. So there is the yarn tag. And this is a beautiful combination, totally up my alley, of kind of mauve grays, kind of a reddish purple, some very pale taupe. Gorgeous. And with the cashmere, it's just a beautiful feeling base. So here's where I am on it. Doesn't really look like much at this point, but that is what I'm working on. So that is in progress, and I will be working on that this week. I would love to have it finished to travel with for Thanksgiving, but we'll see if I get that far. And then last but not least, I have cast on for a new sweater. And this is called the Evening Dew Cardigan by Ruriko. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce her name. It's just a very casual open front cardigan that has a really pretty cable texture stitch on it. And I've had it in my queue for a while. I've been kind of jonesing to cast it on. Decided I was just going to do it. I put my Gone to Seed sweater, which is kind of it's the short sleeve one with lace panels, and it's in a very lightweight yarn. I decided to put that one on hold because realistically, I'm not going to wear it anytime soon, and I would actually like to wear this one this season. So this is knit with one strand of a lightweight fingering and one strand of mohair. So here is the swatch that I did for it. It's showing maybe a little greener here than it is in real life. It's got a lot of kind of dark cranberry purple and grays in it. And I am loving how it looks. I'm not very far along, but let me show you the yarns that I'm using separately. This is from an indie dyer called Ex Libris Fibers. All of her yarns are based on books, as you might guess. This is her Anais base, which is a silk merino fingering in the colorway Mrs. Dalloway. And this is the mohair that I'm using, which is from Swoon Fibers. It's her Kid Mohair Silk blend, lace weight, in Spring Blooms. So this is what I'm using together. Hang on one second, I'll be right back. Sorry about that. My husband is on travel yet again, and he was just checking in to let me know he's on his last leg of his flight today. So he is almost home. Just like to have knowledge of where he is in the world. Okay, so my Evening Dew cardigan. So the construction on this is kind of interesting. You cast on you do a crochet temporary cast on. You pick up all the stitches for the top of the sweater. Do some short rows for shaping at the neck. Then you knit it's about 5 inches all with all the stitches together. Then you divide for the sleeve openings. So you work the front separately and the back separately. Then you rejoin everything and you go back to work the body of the sweater down. And so I am not very far along, but this is where I am right now. And you can kind of sort of see there's this textured stitch. It looks almost like a reverse upside down pine cone, or a pine cone hanging off of a tree. Very subtle. But this is how it is knitting up in this combination. And I obviously am not too far along. I'm at the the circumference, just back and forth at this point before I divide for the fronts. So while I don't have any specific goal to work, like I'm going to get to a certain point this next couple weeks, I am going to work on this pretty steadily. I think it's going to be my travel project, and I will have it to take with me on the plane. And I'll just chip away at it because I would like to have it ready to go to wear this season while it's still cold. Okay, that's going to do us for what I'm knitting. Let's go on and we'll talk about books. I have 3 books to talk to you all about this week. The first of which is the audiobook that I finished that I was reading, that I just started last time we talked, called Before the Coffee Gets Cold. This is a translated book from the Japanese. I will put links to all of the StoryGraph book summaries and tidbits about the books down below, so you can check any of these out that you're interested in. I had a friend recommend this one to me because it has an aspect of time travel in it. And it's not really a historical fiction kind of time travel. Well, let me just talk about the book. The book is set in a small cafe in Tokyo. It's kind of a small, dingy, older cafe. It seats a total of 6 people, and you can go in if you can find it and purchase coffee. They have some late food selections as well. However, in the cafe, there is a specific seat that if you can sit in it, you have the option to go backwards in time or forwards in time. You kind of have to pick a specific date or date range, 3 years in the future in the summer, or 10 years in the past on this day. And there's a whole bunch of rules associated with the time travel. So you can go back, but you cannot change what is happening in the present. So you going back to try to right a wrong and then change the outcome of some other events doesn't happen. You can't do that. And the biggest rule is you have to go to the point in time, have your interaction with whomever you want to visit, who has to have also visited the cafe at some point. It can't be a stranger outside the cafe's doors. You have to have your interaction with them and then be prepared to return to your time before the cup of coffee they've poured you goes cold. So relatively short amount of time. You can't go to the future or past and stay there indefinitely. And the book is divided into 4 almost short stories. The characters who inhabit the cafe are, the owner and the waitresses. They appear in all of the stories, and the stories all are somehow related to them and a few of the patrons. So it's a relatively limited cast of characters, but it sort of looks at 4 types of love. One of the patrons wants to know if this breakup she had with the man she realizes she's in love with, if it gets resolved, if they meet up again in the future. One of the stories is about the bonds between 2 sisters. One is about the bonds between an older couple, husband and wife, where the husband is suffering from Alzheimer's disease. The wife is a nurse, and how that has changed their relationship. And then one is a relationship between a mother and her child. So this is a very quiet little book. It doesn't have a ton of action going on in it. The people who choose to go to these specific events in time have had some major life change that has prompted them to wonder, could things have happened differently, or what will the future hold? And I felt like the pacing was fairly slow. I mean, it's a pretty short book. I think it's like 172 pages. It's not very long at all. So it doesn't take a lot of time for each of these interactions to happen, because again, it's just, they can only be there for the time that the coffee takes to grow cold in their coffee cup. But it is a very sweet book about kind of the power of love and relationships, and it has kind of a bittersweet feel, because knowing that nothing you can do or say if you go to the past or the future will change the immediate moment that you're in, means that in some instances, that something is going to happen. For instance, the couple that is the husband and wife, who the husband has Alzheimer's. In the present day, he has Alzheimer's. Nothing will change that fact. He's already forgotten who his wife is. She wants to go back in time to a point that he still remembers her. And for her, it's worth it to go back to have that moment and remember and realize how much he loved her. And while it doesn't change the fact in the present that he has Alzheimer's, it changes how she perceives their current relationship. So for her, it's worth it to go back and just have those 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever amount of time she has. So I enjoyed this book, but I kind of gave it like a B- type rating, because I felt like the translation was kind of clunky, and I would have liked to have read it, I think, with a different translation. There isn't one. There is the translation into English, but I think it lost something in translation. The style is very different than most American writers. The pace is much slower. There's a lot of things that are sort of part of the Japanese culture in terms of how they interact with parents, how they interact with each other, and just the entire kind of coffee pouring ceremony reminds me a lot of sort of the tea ceremony. There's certain steps that have to happen, and everything is very structured in that pouring of the coffee presentation, as opposed to going to Starbucks and ordering your order and standing in line and having the barista just give it to you. There's kind of more personal interaction involved. I felt like some of the phrases that appeared in English were odd. They aren't how I think most writers who speak English as their native language would write. And so for me, it was a little bit jarring, and I had a harder time kind of getting immersed into the concept of the book. So I liked it, but didn't love it. Your mileage may vary. I did listen to an audiobook version of this, which was fine. It wasn't great. It wasn't horrible. So a so-so book, in my opinion, but a sweet one and an enjoyable light read. Okay, so the other two books to talk to you about today are things that I am currently reading. I am currently reading book 4 in the Shadowhunter series by Cassie Clare, called City of Fallen Angels. That's my monthly buddy read with my friend Tosh, and she and I are working our way through the entire collection of those, one a month. More in the Shadowhunters world. This continues the stories with Clary and Jace and Simon. If you're a fan of the books, you kind of know all of those. If not, it's a young adult fantasy set in New York, which has demon hunters in it and is an enjoyable, fun read. Then I've also moved into Nonfiction November, which is an initiative that is supported and hosted by a booktuber called A Book Olive. And she, every November, encourages people to read it, at least more, whatever that might be for you. More books that are nonfiction titles. If you normally read none, it's a great time to pick up a nonfiction book. She has great suggestions on her booktube account, which I will link. And if you're somebody like me who enjoys reading nonfiction, it's just an encouragement to read more than you normally do. So the first book that I've picked is the book called Dead Wake, which is by the writer Erik Larson. He has a ton of different books on historical events mostly, and this is indeed another one of those. It is about the sinking of the Lusitania during World War I. It's the kind of seminal event that pushed the United States to become involved with the conflict in Europe. And it is just the kind of book that I love. Obviously, this is an historical event, so we know that this has actually happened. We know that this has come to pass. There's nothing that's going to change those facts. But the way that the author kind of builds the suspense to it, he does a great job setting the stage for what's going on militarily in the European theater. In addition, he's also giving a lot of social history about what was going on in New York, because the Lusitania left New York on its way to England. So he's talking about the types of people who would have booked passage on the ship, kind of where they fit into the culture of northern East Coast America. He talks about the development of submarine technology, because that's going to play an important part in this story. He also talks about the development of ocean liners and these huge vessels, keeping in mind that this is in May of 1915, and in April of 1915 is when the Titanic sank. So these big ocean-going vessels were, in the news, in people's thoughts. There was a lot of publicity around things that were related to these huge ocean liners, and the Lusitania was no different. It was something that, was a very luxurious trip if you could afford the first class tickets, and it was kind of its own floating luxury hotel. The other part of the story that he's just started to bring in the point in which I am in the book, talks about Woodrow Wilson, who was president of the United States during this time. Wilson has just lost his wife. He's in a very bad personal depression, and talks about some of the things that were factoring into his thoughts on America's policy towards the war and whether or not we would get involved with it. So those are the two very different books that I'm reading right now. I am reading Dead Wake for the Nonfiction November prompt of record, because the author uses a lot of public records, newspaper items, bills of lading, personal and public clippings, like news clippings about various things that were going on here in 1915, as well as war records from the UK, their efforts to break German code and figure out what was going on with the German submarine fleet, as well as records about the British Navy of the time. So I will report back on those next time, but that is currently what I'm reading. Good books. I'm enjoying both of those. All right, let's talk about cross stitch next. So I have some amazing news to report for cross stitch this go round. I have finished all of the plain cross stitching that goes into my desert mandala. This is a huge thing. I I have a very bittersweet feeling when I put those last stitches in. This project has been a long time in progress. It's not quite done, but I am so close. I am planning on finishing this weekend. So next time we talk, I will have like a flyover video that will show you the entire piece, and I'll pick out bits and pieces that I particularly love. But for today, let's look at where I am. So I have finished this last landscape, which is representing arches. I'm actually going to turn this way so you guys can see. Yeah, okay. So this was the last landscape to finish. There were a ton of color changes in it, but I have completed it and I love how detailed it looks. It does have some of the black metallic thread in it, so there's kind of a sculptural quality to it compared to the thicker 2 strands of the regular floss that are, you know, what you're seeing here. Other than that, and some back stitching that's here on the cacti, no specialty stitches in this section. So other than the bazillion color changes, it, you know, was pretty straightforward. I love how that looks. That came out so great. Now, the other thing that I have started doing, which you guys may or may not be able to see, I think you can see. Yeah, definitely the sparkles. I have started adding in all of the big crystals. So I am done up to here. Everything is done here. I've got the like turquoise bicorns. These are citrine square ones, and there's turquoise square ones. There's little iridescent ones there. I think you can see the sparkle. Yeah, loving it. So I wanted to leave this on the frame just to make sure I could show you guys the arches, but I have started work on all of that glitz that's up there. So I am this far up. So I'm going to unroll the scroll frame today or this weekend and continue to work this way to finish. I actually don't have that much. I went through each of the pages. This was a like mystery class at some point in the Wayback Machine. So like the very center is one lesson, and then this border is one lesson, and the kind of each of the major motifs is one. So I went back through all of those in the PDF to take a look at what I needed to do. And obviously these square beads go all the way around this border. But then beyond that, I mean, I don't really even have that many, right? So there's 2 in each section of this. I have the turquoise beads to do with the corners. There's 4 of those on each landscape. I have this one done. I have half of each of those done. So I have an equivalent number of 6 left to do. And then you can't see it on this one, but there's these triangular motif like shapes that are above each of the landscapes. And each of those has a single large crystal in it. That's it, y'all. All of the small beading is done. So this is so close to being finished. I feel very confident that I will get this done this weekend. We don't have a lot planned. So yeah, I'm going to have this finished. And I can't wait to share a more detailed video of it with you. Again, I'll do like a flyover with it laid flat so that you can see the whole thing. And then I'll talk about any details that I found particularly interesting. This has been so much fun to stitch. If you followed me long ago when I first got started on this, this is one I decided to kit up myself. So I used the list of supplies that came with the PDF, and I ordered everything a la carte as opposed to ordering from European Cross Stitch. I think European Cross Stitch is probably the better deal just because it comes out in the wash in terms of by the time you have all the bits and bobs shipped, you kind of lose any savings that you might have. And I am now left with several of these larger beads and definitely the smaller ones that exist, like the ones that I use for the body of the scorpion. I have oodles and oodles of those left. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them. I guess I will use them at some point, but at least for right now, I have more than I need, except I did wind up running out of the white hand-dyed silk. I bought what was in the list, but I wasn't even close. I had one strand that I used to do a little bit of the clouds here. I had saved it. It appears in the feathers, so I had enough to do the feathers. And part of the reason I worked this last is I knew I was going to be short. So I worked the clouds in that kind of off-white hand-dyed color. I had one strand of thread left, or, it's 2 strands of thread, but one length of it, and then I ran out. So I matched up a DMC color as close as I could, and there's a pale gray in the clouds as well. So kind of as I moved this way, I did one strand of the DMC floss paired with one strand of the gray to do kind of a blended floss palette that kind of eased the transition into where I was just using plain DMC. But I was nowhere close. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, I just have, one little tiny bit left to do. I had probably 4.5 long lengths of the DMC that I had to use in order to get all of the clouds finished. So I don't know if the listing is wrong or it's been updated since I bought the copy of it, but at any rate, I ran out and I didn't use this in places and then have to frog a whole bunch. So I don't know what happened there, but at any rate, it all worked out. I'm pleased with how this looks. I don't think that you could tell if I didn't say anything about it. So, all's well that ends well, but just FYI, if you are working on this pattern and kitted this up yourself, you might just double check and see if you need to either be very careful with the English ironstone colorway of the silk, or if you're going to need another skein of it. I know there's several of you who were working on this because you've mentioned it on Instagram. Okay, so that is my news for today with that particular project. That is all I have been working on. I'm in the home stretch. I haven't yet decided what I'm going to do for the remainder of November. We will have some time where we're traveling where I won't really have any stitching that I will get done. I do want to finish up a wool applique piece that's been sitting languishing. I just have to put the sandwich together. So I might do that as a little quick project. And then I think I may be in the mood for some holiday stitching, and I may drag out a long winter's nap, which is my full coverage ornament, the round one, and work on that going in from late November into December. But you'll know next time once I come to visit with you then, because I will have decided what I'm going to work on at that point. Okay, I think that's everything for today. As always, thank you for joining me. I appreciate that you've chosen to spend some time with me today and hope that you've enjoyed what I've had to show. I will be back at some point in November. Don't panic if it's not exactly 2 weeks from today, because I think that's the Friday before Thanksgiving when we're possibly in transit in some way. Probably be after Thanksgiving unless I do a very short one just before we go. But either way, I will be back in November at some point. I hope that you all are doing well, staying safe, enjoying the season at your end of the world, wherever that might be. Talk to you later, y'all. Bye.